I need some traction. You need some traction.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lloyd Lobo. I'm the co-founder of TractionConf and Boast AI. Super stoked for today's session. One of the most respected and successful product leaders in the Bay Area, Alex Hood, head of product at Asana. Super stoked to learn from him. Alex spoke at Traction last year, and I was taking notes down, although I organized the event, and I implemented a lot of his experience and learnings into our product processes. And today we're joined by our beloved host, John Coutier. He's my go-to person anytime I have a big name or super experienced speaker, because John pulls out the best insights from the speakers. I want to give a shout out to our sponsors here, Pendo, Boast AI, Launch Academy, in partnership with BCF Ventures, Lazaridis Institute, and Founder Institute.
Lloyd, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure. No pressure, right? No pressure. Well, we've got a great guest today, and I'm going to kick it off this way. Look, every startup wants to build high growth products. It's kind of the reason why you exist. It's kind of the reason why you're a startup. Well, we figured who knows more about that than the company that manages all our projects. In fact, they're a high growth startup themselves. Asana has over 75,000 customers, and small little known names among them like Google or Slack. Twitter is there. Harvard is there as well. So today we're chatting with Asana's chief product officer. His name is Alex Hood, and we kind of want to learn, hey, what's your playbook for building high growth products? How's it work? What's it look like? And frankly, what can we copy for our own startups? Maybe not so much that way, but welcome, Alex. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks, John. Good to be here.
Excellent.
I don't know if my head's going to fit inside the Zoom frame anymore with all that voice to start with.
Your head fits. It looks great. Your background looks much nicer than most of ours. But hey, happy to have you on. You're in San Francisco right now, so you got some smoke going on, but it's pretty clear at the moment. So,
gosh, I woke up this morning and there was a little bit of ash on my car, and it's unseasonably warm here, but you can't open up a window. So, trials and tribulations of the Bay Area living.
Wow. Well, thanks for spending some time together with us. Let's talk a little bit about Asana just to get started here. How's Asana working together right now? I mean, obviously you're probably using Asana, but how are team members working under coronavirus?
Well, we're all at home. So yeah, that's a big change for us. We invest a lot to have teams share oxygen. But our mission is around helping teams collaborate effortlessly. So it feel like, man, it is the time for Asana to thrive.
Yes.
And for if there's ever been inspiration to build out our roadmap, it is now.
Yes.
We use Asana for everything. We dog food, all the new features, and everybody uses it as infrastructure at Asana. So, I think it helps us do some things. It helps us create barriers between work and life. It helps us optimize what we should be collaborating on async versus sync. And it helps kind of keep us organized of a plan of record of who's doing what by when. Because if you have that magical combination, clarity, plan of record, then you don't have to be pinging each other all the time. For hey, what's the status of this? Can you fill out the status spreadsheet? Hey, Friday afternoon, can you join this status meeting? All that stuff is so old school, energy zapping, and there's just better ways. So I don't like working from home, but I couldn't imagine doing it without a tool like Asana. So That's our Asana ad, but it's also how I feel.
I totally get it. I totally understand. I love working from home myself. It almost sounds like you're dissing Slack there, but I totally understand. It integrates very, very well with Slack.
Yeah, we use Slack all the time. We use Slack interchange with Asana all the time. They both play a role, and we have a nice integration between the two.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about you real quick here, so people understand where you're coming from and where your insights are coming from. Give us a brief history, your journey from NASDAQ, Intuit, Asana.
Yeah, sure. I worked at NASDAQ as a kind of a product manager. I don't know if they had that role there, but I was a data analyst in the economic research division, where we would take a look at the stock market and we would break down all the data, and then we would see, hey, if we change the way that the market operated this way or this way or this way, would it be faster, more fair? Would buyers and sellers meet each other in a new and inventive way that the New York Stock Exchange at the time, which wasn't automated, couldn't replicate? So that's kind of where I started to think about and get some skills around data and product strategy. I went to business school here at Berkeley, and then joined Intuit and started off in a corporate strategy role, and then started working on QuickBooks Desktop back when it was sold on CD-ROMs. And that was a real great experience. And I started to fall in love with the process that Intuit uses to create great products. You know, human-centered design. They call it design for delight. That made a big impression on me. Also, my time in corporate strategy made a big impression on me because I learned how to apply the scientific method to business and product problems. And that is now kind of part of my wiring now.
Interesting.
Worked on QuickBooks, helped transition it to be a SaaS product. Left QuickBooks and Intuit for a little while and worked at a company called TubeMogul, which was went public, was acquired by Adobe, and then came back to Intuit for a little while. And by that time, QuickBooks Online was kind of the name of the game, core of the strategy. It was growing rapidly across the world. So, I led some of the product team there to help it grow internationally.
Very cool. Very cool. And now, of course, you're at Asana, and one of your goals is to change the way teams work together. And you didn't realize what that goal really meant until maybe February or March of this year. But what do you want to change about the way that teams work together or used to work together?
Well, yeah, I spend so much of my time trying to assemble amazing product teams. So you look for really creative people who have shipped a bunch of things in their background, who bring a unique philosophy to things, are very creative, collaborative. But you put them into a situation where information workers, 1.25 billion of them in the world, spend 60% of their time on work about work. Wow. And that is all the nonsense and BS where you're actually manufacturing information about the things that you're supposed to be doing instead of actually doing the things that you're supposed to be doing. Stuff like status meetings, trolling through email to find the last plan of record, getting hit up for status on notifications and everywhere. And for me, that's a shame because here I am trying to find the best team to do the most creative stuff. And I've already taxed them at a 60% rate.
Yes.
So how might we create a new set of tools for how we work together? And how might those tools reduce the burden of work about work so that people can be more in flow? Teams can be more efficient, organizations can have higher engagement, which leads to better performance. That's what we're really focused on at Asana. So it totally fires me up in the morning because I care so much about building product teams. And I feel like, hey, if my contribution to this world here is teams can invent 10% faster because of 10% less BS, yeah, that sounds great. I'm happy with that contribution.
That is amazing. I have typically hated project management throughout my life in my career, just because I love doing the things I do. What we're doing right now, this is the sort of thing I love to do. The things that are core to the difference I can make, that's what I love to do. And all the work around it that still needs to happen at some level, I've hated. But that is a great we just take that 30 seconds of that 1.25 billion knowledge worker spending 60% of their time on crap. That's a great ad for Asana.
And then, you know what? I think about what fires me up, and it's building things. And I also have 2 young kids, and I think about the energy I bring home after a day where I spent 60% of my time on work about work, versus where I've spent 60 or more % of my time on creative problem solving, big customer problems with teams. And I'm a different person.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally get it. Excellent. So for everybody joining us, thank you for joining us. It's wonderful. I see a lot of you are introducing yourselves. That's awesome. If you haven't, please do so. We're going to go through a bunch of different questions that we've kind of crowdsourced and added. I might have snuck a few in there as well. You know, maybe I'll trip up a little bit here and there, and we'll see how we go. But you probably have some questions as well, and maybe some really, really good ones. Throw those in Q&A, and we'll get to those before we're done. Awesome. Let's kick off with product. It kind of starts with product, right? We're product focused in the startup world. I'm going to give you the real easy one first off, Alex. How do you build a hypergrowth product?
Yeah, easy. Well, this might not be rocket science, but starting with a massive customer problem. That is the biggest way to build high growth product, you know, something where the pain is so difficult that people might not even know it's a pain. You know, back to the Asana thing of like 60% of time people spend is work about work. Then when we actually have people label their work about work, they say it's only 30%, and they say 30% is still too high, right? In QuickBooks, it's about small businesses being successful and prospering. What's a big unmet need out there where you can present something that is, you know, number one, has a benefit that people care about. Number two, is super easy to grok and get started with. And then number three, the delight, like, has a big emotional outcome. Like, after you experience it, you're like, yes, God, I can't imagine that way I did things a week ago in the old system. You know, that's kind of the recipe.
That's really interesting because, I mean, if I think about the problems that we try and solve, if your audience, if all of us pretty much, or many of us, are doing 60% of our day-to-day work just to do the work that really matters, we might start thinking that that's the work that matters. The 60%, that's what I do. That's what I focus on. And we start building structures around that. We start building job titles around that. And that's really interesting. We're fish. We don't see the water.
Well, exactly, right. And I feel like in my career, I've hired some really great folks, and I've also made some hiring mistakes. And reflecting on that, I've learned that you can really easily over-index hiring product folks who are great communicators / politicians, who are evangelizing their work above all else to really evangelize themselves, instead of finding people who have bold ideas and know how to bring them to life for their customers.
Mm-hmm.
But you bring out sort of those bad elements if you have a lack of clarity in your organization. Like, if everybody's not clear what the priorities are, then you've created a situation where someone can use in-office politics to make their thing a priority. Mm-hmm. And instead of really awarding product rigor that will create a great customer outcome, you might reward communication rigor around how you evangelize something to get your way. And so I'm really, we're really clear on what are the things that we expect in the interview loop and reward our product folks on, versus what are the things we just want to shy away from.
Yeah, really interesting. So you talked about hypergrowth products and finding a massive problem to solve. Let's talk about the actual product that, let's say, solves it. When you look at a product that really succeeds, it gains hypergrowth, it gets there. Is that product typically an order of magnitude better than the competition or not?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, let's take a look at a couple of examples here. Let's take like Zoom and Slack. those are two categories where there are a lot of entrenched competitors who are doing that trying to offer those kinds of benefits to customers, but then really got kind of tossed to the wayside when Zoom and Slack emerged. And I laid out a little framework there in answering a previous question. You have to have a benefit that people care about, big problem. You have to make it very easy to consume your solution. And then you need to have an emotional outcome on top of that. That's the recipe to really the best products out there. So I think Slack and all of its competitors had benefits that folks care about. Same with Zoom and all of its competitors. But the ease of actually consuming that benefit was quite different for Zoom versus its competitors. They made it, how many minutes have you spent in your life like getting the video conference to work and somebody's on mute? Zoom just figured that stuff out. And because they figured out basically UI flow, they dominated. Slack went to the next piece. So I think Slack and its competitors had benefit and a lot of ease, but they were able to deliver an emotional outcome of feeling connected to your team. That sense of belonging. That's one of the reasons people work and love their work is because they feel like they belong to something that is greater than just themselves. Slack gets that. Yep. And they capitalize on that. So that's the difference, I think, between the good and the great.
You know what's really interesting there is that Zoom did do that. It made things easier. It actually, to accomplish that, broke some rules about sandboxing of how apps should act, how they should update, how they should be invoked, and other things like that. And it brings up an interesting question. I'm not presuming to answer it right now, but it brings up an interesting question. Do you need to break some rules sometimes in order to get where you need to go and then kind of fall back and fix those? I don't know if you have a thought on that. I don't want to put you on the spot, but that is an interesting way of looking at it.
Well, you certainly are not going to get as far if you're thinking about it the same way as everybody else. And then your thing is like an increment better, just an incremental add-on to other things. It's very replicable. But if you come at maybe a problem with a whole different hypothesis, frame of mind, mental model, then that's durable. You'll build something that's durably different. We have a really high caliber UX research team at Asana. They report directly into me. They don't report in through design. And that's purposeful because I want them to just generate these amazing insights and create a mental model on which we will innovate or build our solution, and put that aside from just looking at competition and seeing how we could fit, in a way that's different or better than them. Mm-hmm. That is another way to build durability around how your solution will win. I was just having a conversation on my way in with a designer on our team, and we were thinking about calendaring, and we were actually discussing how might we build a calendar in a way that protects an individual contributor's flow time. Whereas calendars are basically meant to have meetings dominate your day. Yes. So that's an example of how we're trying to think about breaking the construct of calendars now so that we can have it serve a different purpose.
Really, really interesting, and a good segue actually, because you've talked about hypergrowth coming from a hyper focus on design. Talk about that. What's that mean?
Yeah, well, and when I say design there, I want to be clear. I'm not just talking about pixels. I'm talking about process. One thing I picked up at Intuit was what they call design for delight. And really it's the double diamond process. There's two aspects to that. You focus on the pain, get a real understanding of the pain before you go into solutioning. And you give yourself a time of converging thinking and research before you narrow in. That allows you to make sure you understand everything really well and do a lot of brainstorming before then you start to narrow in on a particular rubric of like why these things should be the things that you shift. That process is how product teams more than likely will deliver the right thing versus like some solution that's in some founder's head that they think is uniquely right for them, but might only serve a customer of one. Or it might be just kind of like a crazy something that like the public that they're not attached to will never use. But what's endemic in that double diamond process is that you are iterating with customers along the way. You're like, you're paper prototyping, you're shipping a beta, you're using Figma designs and treating it like product and having customers click through it. And all the way, you're just looking for, is there any surprise? Is there anything that we can sink our teeth into? That process, that's the winning process in my view. Then on top of that, what's the right amount of pixel excellence for a lot of time, like just shipping it out there and getting quick learnings. Eric Ries lean startup style is the way to go. But at scale, we want to have a product experience that's excellent. So making sure that while you are adding in complexity or more features to your product, you're actually decreasing the complexity to the user, for instance. That's like the pixel piece of making sure that you're building something that retains all that ease while you are expanding the benefit delivery.
So really, really interesting. And there's a tension there between the process that you need to go through and some kind of time frame, right, for delivering something, for the product that you want to ship. And what comes to mind, I remember reading about Twitter and the development process, and literally 1,000 prototypes or 1,000 stages, of a team before they ship something, and months working on some tiny feature or something like that. Maybe that's why we don't have an edit button yet. I'm sure that's political, but can you go too far and slow down development? How do you manage that tension?
Well, the process I described is not a waterfall process. It's an agile process. So you can be shipping all the way through. The most important thing is by understanding a customer pain really well, understanding your customer really well, doing a lot of great brainstorming, you are creating and figuring out what's the ideal customer experience. And then you're working backwards from that to figure out what's the minimum scope you need to get out. That's kind of how we run the show. We don't go and iterate on something 1,000 times before we ship it. There are some very successful companies out there. Apple creates beautiful and elegant experiences using that methodology. We're younger and scrappier than they are. So we use a methodology where we launch and learn. We run betas, we run alphas, we have paper prototypes. But the prototypes are sacrificial in the name of learning, and it's meant to accelerate process to the best solution. Only in means of acceleration, not for the sake of coming up with the most beautiful and elegant right out the door.
Yes. So let's talk to the founders in the audience who are building a company and building a product. What should they focus on when they're trying to determine whether it's product market fit or feature market fit?
Well, Eric Ries does a nice job in the Lean Startup methodology talking about finding customers who will pay for your product. That's one way. Maybe even before that, it's like, if you've gone through the work of finding a big unmet problem out there and you have decided that you can really create a benefit out there in the market that other folks have not done, you got to find a way to measure that benefit. So the measure of the actual delivery of the goodness of the product is the most important thing, even before people will buy it. If it's a big enough problem, people will buy it. But I think my tweak on the Lean Startup methodology is, if you just work benefit backed on a big problem, that might actually be more pure to get to a better product than working from, can I monetize this back?
Interesting. One thing that just blows me away about what you do you're super successful, 75,000 customers, but the customer mix is so varied. There's tiny startups, there's young Series A, Series B startups. There's one person companies that I know of that use Asanas, and there's massive enterprises, right? Google, there's NASA, there's major organizations that use Asana. How on earth in this age when you're supposed to build the product specifically for a particular audience, how on earth do you make that fit? How do you make that scale or be stretchy across those different needs?
Yeah, I mean, good question. I'm very thrilled to have some of the partners that I have at Asana. The counterparts on the business, sales and marketing, go-to-market team are really awesome. And we have a shared process where we and they look at all the customer feedback that we get, called voice of the customer. It all comes into Asana, as you can imagine. We also look at our UXR findings, and we develop a voice of the business list. And every 6 months, I get a stack ranked list in a great order of detail of what the business actually wants to accomplish, that takes into consideration all the customer types, all the verticals, all the opportunities for growth. And that list distills the thinking of what is most important to growing Asana from a revenue perspective. And when you don't have that, you have what I was talking about before. You have like politics and chaos and competition between teams. Getting that list is really helpful. We then take that and we marry that with our product vision. So we have a product vision that we always announce. I just did it fairly recently, a few weeks ago. It's on YouTube. It's called Future of Asana. And we've articulated where we want to take this product in the next few years. It's those two things taken together that allow us to create a roadmap where employees and stakeholders at Asana are like, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I see how the trade-offs were made. It's very transparent, and it's based on where we want to grow this company, grow this organization, service to our mission.
Interesting.
Process kind of matters there.
Yes, at scale especially. So you've talked about flow a lot as well. You've got the vision. You've got the a little bit more tactical feedback on where to go, what to do, but you've actually got to build it. And you've talked about flow a lot. In fact, you mentioned it in this very conversation that we're having. That how do you build opportunity for allowing flow into people's calendars, which is a cool tool kind of designed just to take away their time. Talk about flow. How's that tie into how you're building product and how others maybe could do that as well?
Yeah, I'm kind of a leadership buff. So I'm always trying to, it's my job, and I'm always trying to think about what's the team need from me? And I think servant leadership is a concept. Servant leadership before COVID might have been, what are the decisions that are blocking your team? How can you help them get to that decision or make that decision for them? What are the resources that that team needs? Now that we're all at home and we have a finding at Asana, 60% of the time is spent on work about work. I think servant leadership is all about how do you protect the flow time of creative people to do great things. The decision stuff, that stuff should just actually take care of itself with processes you've already put in place. So like that stuff's broken, you have bigger problems. But I don't think the world's information workers have people who are shepherding their time for creative work. What if you had a leader that did? What if you had tools to help you maximize that? So what's fun at Asana is we're trying to build this culture, and then the things we love about the culture, we productize in the product so that others can feel the manifestation of what we're trying to do. And we do things at Asana like No Meeting Wednesday. We do things at Asana like it's very okay if somebody proposes a meeting to say like, hey, we should just do that async in Asana. That makes sense. We have optimized async versus sync. We use Loom and Zoom Loom allows you to take video of what you're saying and allow it to be consumed async versus having all of your in-person stuff feel like it needs to be sync. Because of that, culturally at Asana, we try to protect creative time so engineers can do more coding, designers can do more designing, product leaders can do more bold thinking. But we're also trying to then focus on that as a customer benefit.
Yeah.
Makes it fun.
Very, very interesting. I want to dig into that just a little bit more because as a startup, there's an interesting and challenging and difficult and treacherous time of scaling. You have early days when you can fit in a room or in a small office, and everybody wears 5 hats, and everybody's in every meeting or just about, right? And you work that way. You're all pretty synced, and all that stuff happens. But as you scale, that changes, and you have to build the culture in over time. How have you seen that happen successfully in your career?
Well, I'll tell you a big aha I've had over the time, which is, you mentioned that the startup time, kind of like high pressure, everybody's in a room, and they all feel very viscerally, the anxiety of that moment. And I think it's very easy then to lead via anxiety. Like you create a bunch of hard stop deadlines for folks. You always are ratcheting up the pressure of what excellent looks like. The promotion is always kind of being jerked away. That is a way to manage. And a lot of the folks who end up in product roles tend to be achievement oriented. So that is a way to manage those folks, and you do get a lot of them. But I'm just trying to change my tack to be, what if the folks who worked on my team knew that I honestly am there to support them and feel great about their contributions, love their intellectual capacity. I'm here to add to and maybe guardrail some of their ideation. What if they knew that when they're not in the room, I talk about them with great appreciation? And what if they knew they could make a big difference and have a lot of autonomy to innovate themselves? First of all, I'd much rather work in that second shop, but it's also more authentic to who I want to be, part of my personal mission and how I've had the most luck. So I sometimes put pressure on myself to get outcomes, but for the team, man, I want them to feel respected, deeply, authentically respected, because I think that produces the best work. So I'd say founders, yeah, it is hard work, hardwired to get this thing going, but if the culture feels highly supportive, your peeps are going to take more risk. They're going to come up with the best idea. They're not going to be incremental in thinking. They're going to stretch themselves out, and they're going to make better decisions when you're not in the room, and that will help you scale faster.
Really, really interesting, because especially for early stage, the founders typically know the problem the best. They understand the customer the best. They're very in tune with the sales process. So they're talking with them all the time. They're very in touch with the 1 or 2 or 3 developers they have on the team. They need to build this feature this way and do it, those sorts of things. Yep. And that does need to change over time because that approach doesn't scale. And we've seen that time and time again, the Series B, the Series C, that just craters because there's not that team, there's not that trust. And it's a great transition, because guess what? The second part of what we wanted to talk about was not just building great product, but the second part was building great product teams. Sure. And maybe we can continue this conversation around, how do you start building a great product team?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that you were going to ask this question, so I brought along I have right here the competency.
The answer. Can you just share that really high, really big? That's the answer. That's how you do it.
these are the competencies that we use for product management. There's another set of competencies for design. This is like our hiring rubric. This is how we decide who gets promoted. This is who gets which projects. Here they are. This is what we care about. Number 1 for product managers, growth mindset. Number 2, strategic rigor. Number 3, get things done. Number 4, ability to grow Team Asana. Number 5, customer centric. And number 6, collaborative. So,
I didn't hear like a degree from a certain school in there.
So we really value people who are open and curious. And, above all else, if you can find folks who are great at their craft and who are open and curious about it and don't have an ego about it, are lifelong learners, that's the recipe for great teams. I'm fortunate, particularly here at Asana, our team is a series of like delightful human beings who are extremely confident at their craft. And they're delightful human beings because they're collaborative and they have a growth mindset. And that means like they don't take it heavy on their heart when something goes wrong. They just take a look and like, hey, what do we learn from this? Like we've institutionalized when a mistake happens at Asana or something goes that wasn't planned, we just do a 5 whys. Like we ask ourselves why on the team 5 times, and we publish the results in the company. And that just instills of like, hey, let's just take a look at this, see what we can learn, move on. No blame, finger pointing. And that allows us to attract people who really want to build product and really are customer focused,
What's really interesting about that, because the terms that you're using to describe the people that you want to hire and the people you want to promote and the people that you want in Asana, somebody could look at that and say, well, those are unicorns. They're highly competent and they're nice, right? And they have all these other qualities as well. That's great, and I'm hiring in San Francisco or I'm hiring in Austin or New York City or something like that. And it's a limited pool already in here, but the kind of the silver lining maybe of the COVID cloud is maybe we can expand a little bit where we're looking for people. And maybe we find somebody in Arkansas who fits that list and can work well with the team.
Yeah. I would caution against settling. You hire a PM who doesn't have a growth mindset, thinks that they've got it all figured out, doesn't listen to research. You've got a designer who isn't collaborative, goes away and comes up with the solution themselves and then springs it on the team. You've got an engineer who thinks about strategy all the time, can't get things done. You'll end up with outages.
Yep.
It's probably better to wait a little while to find the right people.
Interesting. Of course, every entrepreneur wants to hear "wait a while." That's just
right.
They love that sound.
Or find a portfolio of people that will work well together. But if substantial outages in any one of the areas might come back to bite you, unless you don't share the same values that I do and how we've assembled the team, then you have your own competency.
100%, very possible. So you talk about something that is interesting that struck me as somewhat unique. I know is a crazy characterization, but you talk about hiring role models. And typically we think of role models as somebody, whoa, that's amazing. I look up to that person. And you talk about hiring them. Talk a little bit about what you mean there and how that works.
Yeah, well, the process of building product is 2 things really deconstructed. There's the actual building of the experiences and there's building capability on the team. Those are the same thing done right. They're not 2 separate exercises. So if by the very nature of the way that your team builds things, they get better at their craft because of the processes they use, the leaders that are on the team, the frameworks that the company uses, the outside influence that we bring in, all the supporting mechanisms, how product reviews are run. that allows somebody to build great things for the customer and at the same time get better. But if you think about those things at the same time, then you know that role models are important, because the folks who are building up the craft in others are making important customer decisions and also making really important growth path decisions. And they're managing two roadmaps. They're managing the feature roadmap and the roadmaps of individual folks as they're managing their career ladder and gaining competency. But if you think about those two things as separate, you'll probably hire some wonky folks. Think about those things as together. You hire role models who are excellent at their craft.
Very, very interesting. So you've got to find these people. And there's different challenges at different stages. You're a startup, you're brand new, you don't have a lot of track record. Maybe you can give away a significant chunk of equity, but there's also a minuscule chance of that actually getting big. If you're Asana, you're a big name, people want to come and they're attracted to it. But you could be at all different stages there. What hacks have you kind of picked up on for finding talent that work well for you and maybe work well for remote teams as well?
Well, if you're founding a startup, you're probably pretty passionate about the customer problem you're trying to solve, right? Probably keeps you up at night and it flows through your veins. The biggest hack is finding people who share that passion around the same problem. Above all else, folks will then want to learn the capabilities that they need to learn to help you. They'll go and stretch in different ways. But if you can find folks who are really passionate about the problem, man, that's 8/10 of it. I would have never thought in this whole world that I would have spent so much time in my career working on accounting software. Because whenever I take an accounting classes, I thought they were boring. But man, what got me fired up was learning so much and interacting with small business owners who had cash flow problems and were coming up with their own operations, as products in themselves, and were struggling, and like seeing my dad run a small business, all that stuff inspired me to want to make the lives of small businesses better. So, with that mission, and too, it's got a fantastic mission, empowering prosperity, and like that allows them to attract a lot of talent. So I think use your mission as a hook.
Yep. Very, very good. So just a quick note to the audience here. We're going to transition to questions from you fairly soon, not immediately, but fairly soon. So hit up that Q&A button and add in your questions there. And by the way, if it's about 150 words long, I probably can't read it. And Alex won't remember the beginning of it when I get to the end of it. So try and keep it a little bit short. That'd be great. So let's talk about the goals that you set yourself for yourself and for Asana. How do you define success? It's obviously a little different because you've talked about hard deadlines and some of the challenges with hard deadlines. But how do you define success for yourself, for Asana, and what KPIs do you measure?
Well, for myself, there are definitely business and growth KPIs, but then there's also we're starting to orient our product teams around just like measuring the benefit that's delivered. Like we have a way that we actually measure adoption and collaboration. For instance, we have a whole team, some of who I know are listening, who measure the amount of steps that they save customers, and that's what great looks like. I think having product teams who are actually measuring the benefit that they are out there in pixels advertising to those to go and try. And if folks can find a way to consume that benefit and then they would actually deliver the benefit, that's what a home run looks like.
Nice. And I'm going to ask this question. You've mentioned a couple already, but what are some of the tools that you use right now and that you recommend for asynchronous communication, institutional memory? We kind of assume that Asana is on the list, and you've mentioned that already. Any others?
Well, great teams, I think, need three things. They need a place where content lives, So they need, they need Drive, they need, cloud storage. They need G Suite. They need a place where the communication occurs synchronously. So, like Slack. Some folks use email, Zoom. And then they also need a coordination layer. So that's where the plan of record lives. That's where people can go to understand who's doing what by when. That's where if you wake up at 4:00 in the morning and you're worried about the project, instead of pinging 7 people and ruining their morning, you can look and see a real-time view of like how all these things are manifesting. And then you can dive in and provide clarity or troubleshoot straight in that system. Great teams have all 3 of those things. And I think what's interesting is now with work from home, teams that were shared oxygen for 9 hours a day, 10 hours a day, everything was sync. And I think now that coordination layer, the plan of record, there's more importance around that because async becomes a better and more important part of your day.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned with that we also use Loom and Zoom.
Yep.
That's a way to express your emotions and outpour and inspire, maybe be well understood without having to call a meeting.
Yes. That is super helpful. I love the thoughtful way you answer that, the layers of what you need. I'm going to turn to questions from the audience right now, and we've got a lot actually, and we've got some really, really good ones. And this one is really interesting. It's about personal development and personal achievement within a team. And it's a bit of a sad one. And I don't think that the person here is alone. This one is from Michael, but I bet you there's a bunch of others who could say the same thing. He says, I've always been passed over. I'm very competent, but I'm very nice. I'm seen as either threatening or weak. And can you give some personal advice to somebody on a product team or in a startup who, they're super competent, but they're super nice. And for whatever reason, that's either threatening or that's seen as weak?
Well, if you're competent and that is seen as threatening, you're probably not in the right spot. Get out. The world's littered with companies that are much better than the one that you're at, frankly. And know enough to do that because it's sort of, it's a shame to end up in a culture like that. But sometimes nice and competent and might manifest as like, you don't speak up. Here's an exercise. Do your boss's job in your head. So as you go about your day, do your job. And then when you see your boss has a bunch of decisions to make, what would you do? Come up with a perspective of what that would be. And that will allow you to grow in terms of the scope and scale of problems that you're dealing with. But also you'll have a point of view. You will come into a meeting with a point of view of all the things, not just the things on your plate, but at a higher order. And share that point of view. Share that you have a hypothesis and you've got some data to back it up. Don't wilt or be, and don't contribute and be stuck in a place where it doesn't seem like you're contributing. Contribute your point of view and what backs it up. In the right cultures, customer data wins all ties. So if you've got some customer data to contribute, that is a point of view that hasn't been heard in the room. Speak the heck up.
Yeah. Excellent. And it's not just your opinion anymore. It's not just what you want anymore. It's what the customer wants. Here's one that is a challenging problem for almost all entrepreneurs. This one is from Hemant. He says, what minimum features do you need during the MVP, the minimum viable product? And do you pivot when there's similar features offered by competitors?
Well, the minimum required is what to like actually deliver a benefit. And if you do need to have something unique out there, or you're not going to get funding, or you'll end up as a Me Too, it's probably not satisfying. So it might be the case that that ideal customer experience that you've envisioned is something that is unique, differentiated, and has a durable advantage. And it might be then the first thing that you ship to get to a place where you could offer that big thing is roughly similar to what somebody else has got. Fine. Just know that you're not done. Get to a place as fast as possible where you can test out the hypothesis that this is a winning idea and work backwards from it.
Makes sense. This question is from Harad and is asking about that 60% tax on our time, the work to enable the work. And says, Asana can help as a product, but what elements of culture have you found crucial to reducing that 60% tax?
Yeah, I think really thinking hard about what can be done async versus sync is one. I think another is having a culture where being concise and being pithy with your point of view makes a difference. Where like long paragraphs that are philosophical aren't viewed as inspirational or influential. I mentioned we have no meeting Wednesdays. You can institute something like that. You could have as part of your like regular operating rhythm, hey, every 6 weeks your team goes and looks and tries to reduce the meetings that might not be needed.
Yeah.
Those are some examples.
Here's a question that in my experience, all entrepreneurs really struggle with, especially earlier stage, but for some personality types of founders, they struggle with it for years after and maybe never stop. And it's looking around at other competitors. So Akshat says, in your product process, how much emphasis do you pay on what your competitors are doing and where should one draw the line?
Well, I feel very inspired by competitors. That might be the way to think about it. There are some competitors out there who are doing some really cool stuff in our space, and I just love to watch them because those are experiments where they've taken on the engineering burden to run a hypothesis or a test, and I didn't have to do that ourselves, and we can see how it nets out for them. Like, oh, hey, they're taking a different tack. Let's see what happens next time they publish their growth metrics, or let's see if they get product market fit or traction or new funding. Or even sometimes they experiment with a new way to deliver the benefit in their UI. You're like, oh man, the way that manifested was so cool. I never even thought about that way. So I mentioned the double diamond is kind of like go broad, go narrow. And I think while you go broad, yeah, you are inspired by those around you, either competitors or even folks in completely different spaces.
Mm-hmm.
When I do a lot of hiring around like adoption or product folks who work in the first experience, and I always try to think about what are the industries where it's very difficult to get somebody through a funnel. So I look at like travel sites and like those who work in online banking or even like signing up for insurance online. You just know that they've poured through how to get through a difficult, complex funnel to get to an end result. That's not a competitor, but it's something to be inspired by and to look for, see how others have done it broadly.
Yeah. Here's a couple questions from two people that I'm going to put together, and it's about product managers. And the first question is from Marshall, and he says, what makes a legendary product manager? The other one is from somebody anonymous, is how do you screen for creativity in a product manager? So maybe talk a little bit about hiring PMs, what that looks like and what you're looking for.
Yeah, well, I mean, I mentioned the competencies, and I'll just repeat them because I saw that there was a comment out there where somebody was looking for them again. Growth mindset, strategic acumen, get stuff done, grow team Asana, customer-centric, and collaborative. And that basically ends up being a rubric. And when we take applications for product managers, we assign a homework assignment. And that homework assignment gives us a sense of how customer focused or how creative somebody is. Then we bring somebody in and we have them jam with some designers. They hit the board on a problem. That's the fun part of doing the job, and that's where you want somebody to really shine.
Yeah.
So we have a rubric of what's great about that versus what's not, and then we make sure that things like no ego, ability to change your mind, numerate, data backed, all the other things that kind of fit in as subcategories under the things that I mentioned. We have ways to screen for that stuff as well during the interview process. And the end result is that you end up with some folks who really want to do great things, are mission driven, are great at their crafts, but without some of the negative trappings that you hear around product management, like somebody who's just gunning to be the CEO someday, and this product stuff is fun, but it's just a stepping stone.
Yes.
That stuff is so easy to detect.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. I'm going to get one more question from the audience here, and then we'll hand it back over to Lloyd to take us to a close. This one is from Hui, who says, as a leader, how do you deal with all sorts of opinions? Everybody wants to share and contribute. This async may create another effect, too much communication.
True. And true. Then if you see too much communication as a leader, then you can have a heart-to-heart with your team around how they spend their time. Is this a decision that you need to weigh in on, like what we serve for breakfast at Asana? or would it be better if you focused on something like creating a great design system? How people spend their time often ends up being something that comes up in one-to-ones. And it's a great way to coach around that if you see a lot of async kind of going haywire. It's your role as a leader to set expectations around what great looks like. So you're not at the effect of that. You're kind of in charge of it.
I love the answer to that, because the answer to a problem is not always a process or a rule to give to your team or to your company. Sometimes just a little gentle coaching.
Sure. I mean, product people tend to be fairly achievement oriented, particularly product managers, but all the functions, I've experienced it. So if folks know what great looks like, they're going to want to either join up and try to amplify that great or reflect that great, or they might find that this isn't the definition of great that they look up to, and they should leave and go find another place. Yeah. Those outcomes are fine.
Alex, I want to thank you for spending this time. It's been extremely instructive. It's been amazing. It's been fun. It's been insightful, and I really, really do appreciate your time.
My pleasure. This is so much fun. Thanks, John.
Lloyd, you're back up.
Awesome. Thanks. I enjoyed a ton, and I wrote a bunch of notes as well. So that was fantastic. Thank you, Alex, for joining us. Thanks, John, for, as always, running a fantastic session. I want to give a shout out to our sponsors here, Pendo, Boast AI, Launch Academy, in partnership with BCF Ventures, Lazarus Institute, and Founder Institute.
I need some traction.